And tonight, a man who is fast becoming one of the best-known public intellectuals in the world, Professor Gad Saad, Professor of Marketing at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. He's also an evolutionary behavioural scientist, author and host of the Saad Truth podcast, which has 7 million downloads since it's launched in 2020. His fourth book is the one that really put him on the map, The Parasitic Mind, How Infectious Ideas Are Killing Common Sense. And his much anticipated latest book is out now. Here it is. And it is called The Saad Truth About Happiness, 8 Secrets for Leading the Good Life. Professor Saad, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. Now, is it possible to define what happiness is? Can happiness be defined?
The way that I define it is that it can indeed. So I don't look at happiness as a short-term dopamine hit, right? You can buy a Maserati and feel happy, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the long-term serotonin sense of contentment. You're sitting on your proverbial porch when you're 85, you look around and you say, I think I've lived a really good, purposeful, meaningful life. So it's in that sense that I'm defining happiness.
Oh, brilliant stuff. Gad, apologies in advance. There might be a slight delay on the line, but we will persevere. If my viewers and listeners are seeking happiness, based upon the ideas in your book, where's the best place to start?
So the two decisions that are most likely to impart great happiness or great misery upon you are actually quite obvious ones. Number one, choose the right spouse. If the person that you wake up next to in bed in the morning and the one you return to in bed at night is someone that you like, that's a good thing. And if whatever happens in between those 2 points, which is your job, if that one gives you purpose and meaning, then you're well on your way to being a happy person. And if you'd like, I could break down what some of the decisions that you should look for when you're pursuing those two goals might be, if you'd like.
Well, absolutely. Let's start with the spouse. I mean, I'm very lucky. Mrs. Dolan cannot be improved upon. But yeah, what are the factors that make the right spouse?
So there are two opposing maxims in evolutionary psychology. One is the opposites attract maxim. The other one is the birds of a feather flock together maxim. And it turns out, Mark, that if you're interested in maximizing your chances of long-term success of your marriage, it's overwhelmingly the birds of a feather flock together maxim that is the operative one. Now, you might then ask, well, flocking on which feathers? And here we're looking at having shared belief systems, shared foundational principles of how to conduct our lives. If I am someone who is rooted deeply in my faith and my prospective partner is someone who's a caustic atheist, well, it doesn't take a fancy evolutionary psychologist to argue that we're starting on the wrong foot. And so if you can assort on these important values, boy, does it increase your chances of having a happy marriage.
And how about those steps to the right job, the right vocation? I mean, I think you'll agree, Professor Saad, you're not going to get the perfect job or career overnight. But again, what are the right factors to look out for?
Yeah, so to the extent that it's possible to do so, I argue that there are two key metrics. Number one, any job that allows you to instantiate your creative impulse. So you could be a chef or a stand-up comic or an author or an architect. Each of those professions, while very different from each other, they share one thing in common. They create something anew, something that wasn't there until you came along and you created it. And that automatically gives you purpose and meaning. The second one I would argue that really helps toward occupational happiness is anything that grants you temporal freedom. So I work very, very long hours, but I truly am a master of my schedule. I can vagabond to a coffee shop, sit there for 4 hours thinking about my next book. Then I can go off and jog for an hour. Then I can return and do something else that's meaningful. Contrast that to someone who has a union mandated time as to when they can take a break to go to the bathroom. And so to the extent that you could instantiate your creative impulse and have temporal freedom while doing so, you're well on your way to being happy.
We'll come back to the book, which sounds absolutely fascinating. You've appeared 9 times on the brilliant Joe Rogan podcast, railing against political correctness, or woke as it's now known. Where do you think woke comes from, Professor? And what is the end game?
Right. So in my previous book, as you kindly pointed to in the introduction, The Parasitic Mind, I argue that human brains can be parasitized by a set of idea pathogens: postmodernism, cultural relativism, radical feminism. Each of these idea pathogens, regrettably, I say regrettably because I'm a professor, were all spawned within the university ecosystem around 50, 60 years ago. And then it took a while for these dreadful parasitic ideas to proliferate out of academia. And now they're part of every nook and cranny of society. And so in the book, I actually, toward the end of the book, offer a mind vaccine, an inoculation against these dreadful ideas.
Now, that's a vaccine we can all get behind. Is radical leftism a pathology? Is there something wrong with these ultra-woke people?
Well, I think if I'm going to be charitable, this is how I might give them a bit of a leeway. So I think many of these parasitic ideas start off with a noble cause, but then in the service of the pursuit of that noble cause, they then murder and rape truth. Example, equity feminism is a great idea. We should all be equal under the law. Most people would say, yeah, sign me up. I'm an equity feminist. Then radical feminists come along and say, well, in the pursuit of eradicating the sexist patriarchal status quo, we now have to argue that men and women are indistinguishable from each other. There are no innate biological differences between men and women. And so in the service of an otherwise lofty goal, they end up murdering truth. So I don't think that's necessarily a dispositional pathology, but it's a consequentialist ethos that says, I want to do good in the world, and if I have to murder truth, so be it.
Can wokeism be defeated?
It can, number one, by reading The Parasitic Mind, and by number two, really implementing an ethos of critical thinking. So in the book, I explain how you construct arguments when you're facing hostile crowds. So for example, if I'm trying to convince you that toy preferences have a sex specificity that is innate, it's not a social construction, how would I go about doing that? Well, I can show you data from across species, across animals, across time periods that speaks to that reality. So I don't have to be emotional. I don't have to be hysterical. I don't have to scream louder than you. I build you the nomological network of cumulative evidence, and hopefully I convince you of the veracity of my position.
Professor, briefly, if you can, you were born in Beirut in the Lebanon. Your family fled to Canada in the mid-70s to escape the civil war. How has your early life and your background shaped the man that you are today?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Most directly, it showed me that when you organize a society along tribal lines, it never works out well. Lebanon is organized around religious membership, and progressivism seeks to also create a society where everybody is atomized into different groups. Nothing good comes from that. What's great about the West is that we have individual dignity. I am Gad Saad first, then I'm Lebanese second.
A privilege to have you on the show. We've got two books to plug. First of all, we've got The Parasitic Mind, which is your bestseller, an international bestseller, translated into many languages, and your latest tome, which looks to me to be an absolute must-read. I'll be buying a copy. And here it is. It is called The Sad Truth About Happiness, 8 Secrets for Leading the Good Life by Gad Saad. Professor Saad, I look forward to catching up again in the near future.
Thank you, sir. Great to be with you.